From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello. Hello and welcome to the National Book Festival. I'm Ev Small, a former contributing editor to Book World and currently senior researcher at the Washington Post Company. And the Washington Post is very proud to be a charter sponsor of the Book Festival. And on behalf of the Library of Congress and First Lady Laura Bush, we're glad you're all here and want to welcome you. Before we begin, I want to just point out two things. There are cameras filming this, so as I said to an earlier group, in case you've told family and friends that you're at the office, make sure you duck when those cameras pan the crowd. And when Brad answers questions, if you would please go to the microphones and just line up in the microphone so that everybody can hear your question. I'm delighted to introduce the multi-talented Brad Meltzer. He once said of himself, "I never imagined I'd be a writer. I didn't think it was a real job, no calluses." But he's earned his writing calluses as the best-selling author of thrillers, a writer of comic books, and the co-creator of the TV show Jack and Bobby, which maybe some of you didn't know. Book World's editor, Maria Rana, when Brad did a writing life, she talked about him and his writing life. He wrote from a very early age, and in high school and college, he turned essays into conversations between characters rather than write straightforward essays. And he even submitted his college admissions essay in the form of a love letter to the school. He got accepted. He went off to law school and wrote a novel there, The 10th Justice, one that proved so successful and so much fun that he hasn't worked in a law office since. And lucky for us, he's just been writing. He lives in Miami now, but you should know that he was a local boy living for a time right here in the Washington area. And I read that he found Washington the perfect place to work. He would ride on the subway and listen to conversations and put them right into the book. So he says if people in DC recognize themselves in his book, there's a reason why. So don't be surprised if the next book involves hundreds of happy readers on the mall on a steamy Saturday toward the end of September. And please join me in welcoming Brad Meltzer.
What she actually didn't say was what I really steal on the subway, and that is what you look like. I'm not joking. I'm terrible with doing physical description. In fact, my first book that I ever wrote, my editor wrote in it, "You know, Brad, nobody's wearing anything in this book. You haven't described anything that anyone's wearing." So I went back and I actually redid the book, and I just would have everyone wearing whatever I was wearing. So every scene, he said, in the next version, he said, every character is wearing a faded T-shirt and jeans. Even the Supreme Court justices. And so what I started doing, this is no joke, and everyone knows this is true, I've said it year in, year out, is I would ride the D.C. subways and watch people. And then I would steal what you look like and put it in the book. So I'm just telling you right now, by entering this tent, this is full proof for me to steal what you look like and put you in the next novel. So thank you for your face. The novel is called The Book of Lies, and there's a couple rules when you're an author. They give you like this little rule book, and the number one rule is when you come back to the National Book Festival, don't wear the same suit you wore last time to the National Book Festival. I'll give you a moment to think back and realize that it is the same suit, as 3 people now have told me. Thank you very much. Like it's a new tie. Love my hometown, bastards. So the Book of Lies started for me in a very personal place, and it started with my mother. When I started writing the book when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I finished writing the book, and she finished reading the book just as she passed from breast cancer 5 months ago. And what I love about the novel, it is filled now with my mother. And it is no coincidence that that's why the main character in the book is dealing with the loss of his mother and with the reconciliation of his father. I'm just not that good at hiding it. This is what I was dealing with at the time. And it's why I love that the book is dedicated to her. It's why I love that she's throughout all the pages. And to tell you about my mom, when we first hit the bestseller list a couple years back, I called my mother. And I said, Ma, we got the top spot on the bestseller list. And she starts crying. And when you hear your mom cry, you start tearing up. And now I'm worried she's going to crash the car. So I say to her, Mom, where are you right now? And she says, I'm at Marshall's. Of course she's at Marshall's, right? We're on the top of the bestseller list, and she's still trying to get a deal on irregular socks. But it was my mother's greatest lesson. It is to never, ever, ever change for anybody. And I know I've told that story before to a few people, but let me give you the epilogue to the story. And this just happened, is that when Marshall's corporate headquarters heard that my mom had passed, and this is true, when they heard she passed, they realized they lost the greatest customer they've ever had. They actually sent my family a gift card to be donated to the charity of her choice. And my sister said it best when she said, I don't know if Mom will be happy about this or pissed that she can't spend it. So think about that next time you go to Marshall's. But I do love the fact that she is in this entire book. Now, to tell you where the book came from, the book started for me 11 years ago. And 11 years ago, when I finished my novel, I was living here in D.C., and I finished my novel, The 10th Justice, and I went in to pitch the next idea. And this is a scary moment, because this is the moment where you have to see if you have another magic trick. I don't know if I have another magic trick left, and you got to go pretend to your editor that there's plenty of magic tricks. So I go in there, and I say, this is what I want to do. I want to do a modern-day thriller, but I want to use the great classic story of Cain and Abel. And my editor says to me, you're an idiot. And he said very wisely at the time, listen, we're marketing you as the next John Grisham or whatever they were trying to market me at. Why are you going to go do something crazy like that? And I had this moment where I could either be strong and stand up for myself, or I could cave. And I caved faster than anyone in the history of caving. I mean, I just took a dive so fast. Oh, I hated that book anyway. That was a terrible idea. It was awful. I had barely paid off my student loans. There was no way I was going to risk it on that at that moment. And then 2 years ago, I was at a book signing in Sarasota, Florida. So it was a book signing just like this, although it was Sarasota, Florida, so there were about 80% more Jews in attendance. When I got to the Q&A, a woman stands up. She knows my love of Superman. I'm talking about my love of the character Superman. And this woman stands up and she says, I know more about Superman than you'll ever know. And first I'm like, well, that's a great question. Thank you very much for that. And then she says, I do. And my thought is, lady, there's no way you know more about Superman than I do. And she says, I do. Because Jerry Siegel, who created Superman, is my uncle. And you'd think I would go, oh, that's interesting. I don't care. Right? I don't care what she says. I'm not really listening. I'm just stealing what she looks like for the next book. And so the next moment, another guy stands up and says, I was in the army with Jerry Siegel. And then it's like every Jew who ever knew Jerry Siegel is at this book signing. It's unbelievable, right? I mean, you got to start paying attention now. You can't ignore this. It's like a meteorite to the back of my head. Pay attention, Brad. There's something being told here. This is a message. So I take her number and I call her. And she's the one who tells me about this incredible story about this murder that almost nobody knows about. Because in 50 years of interviews, when they say to Jerry Siegel, where'd you get the idea for Superman? He never once says, my father died in a crime. His father dies in a crime, and weeks later, he creates the world's greatest crime fighter, and he never tells anybody. And that's why the world got Superman. Not because America's the greatest country on earth. It's because a little boy lost his father. And I love this story. I'm fascinated with this story. I'm convinced I can solve this murder. And I admit that maybe I'm playing a little bit of nerd Freud here, and maybe I'm making connections that shouldn't be connected. So I fly to Cleveland, which is where Jerry Siegel first came up with Superman. And I get there, and I want to look through the old copies of The Plain Dealer on microfiche, because I want to see maybe there was something in the newspaper. Maybe there was something that sparked Jerry Siegel's imagination, that he got the idea from the day after his dad died. Let me just look in the paper, see what was there. So I'm going through the old microfiche of The Plain Dealer, although I don't know why I'm making this hand motion when it's microfiche. You know, I'm doing the thing like this. And I go through, and this is the day after he loses his father. His dad is dead. The day after, in the newspaper, is a letter to the editor about why vigilantes should not exist in society. And the letter is signed A.L. Luthor, Lex Luthor. Okay, spelled E-R instead of O-R. And I'm like, is this what we get Lex Luthor from? And no one's ever found this because no one is as big a loser as me and cares about these things. But I love this. I love the Superman story. I think it's a part of American history. And in every book I do, I always write about American history. I always try to take something, whether it's the Supreme Court or the Capitol or anywhere else I write about, and show you what is really what you don't know about it. I try to take that institution apart. And this is as big to me an institution, the character of Superman, as anything else we have. And so I love this story, but even I realize it's only half a story. It's just a cold case that I find particularly interesting. But then I remember this old Cain and Abel story that I left 11 years ago that's been sitting in my brain for 11 years. And a friend of mine says to me, you know the story of Adam and Eve and the apple in the Garden of Eden? And I say, yeah. And he says, the word apple never appears in the Bible. I said, what are you talking about? He says, if you look, it actually says fruit. Some say it's a fig, some say a pomegranate. But the word apple was added there by the Greeks because in ancient Greece, apples were a sign of destruction. That's how the word apple first entered the Bible. And then he says to me, what about the Cain and Abel story? How did Cain kill Abel? And I said, I know that one. That was a rock. And he says, where does it say that in the Bible? The Cain and Abel story is 16 lines long. It is one of the shortest in the entire Bible, and it doesn't say anything about what that murder weapon was. And so it says Cain slew his brother. So some say it's a rock or a stone. Some say, including Shakespeare, that it's the jawbone of an animal. Some say that Cain bit Abel's throat, and that's where we get vampires from. Let me be clear. That is cool to me, okay? We're talking vampires now. I'm in. I'm ready to listen. They got my full attention. I'm ready. The Bible and vampires and Superman. So there's obviously a lot of crazy, fantastic stuff, and then there's the serious side, which is what I always try to focus on. And I start researching this. Now, the best part and why I've been looking forward to this is not because I get to just come home to D.C. in a place that I lived and see people I love, but when I was researching the book, the best academic writing about Cain and Abel and the story and some of these biblical stories was done during the Middle Ages. And the best research and these best articles are not digitized yet. So you have to go to, of all things, imagine this a moment, gasp, a real library. And the library I went to was my library, the Library of Congress, all of our library. This is who helped me with the research of this book. You'll see them throughout the acknowledgments. And they were the ones who helped me track all these stories, because here in D.C., it's still the best place to come for research. And they told me my favorite story that I found in there. It was a story, if you look in any modern Bible today, it says that Cain says to God that my punishment is too great to bear. And the words will change depending on your version, but it says, my punishment's too great to bear. That's why we all think of Cain as the ultimate villain, because he says to God, I killed my brother. Why are you punishing me? You're punishing me too much. But you can look at that same exact line in older versions and translate it as, my sin is too great to forgive. That's Cain saying to God, what I've done is so horrible, you should never forgive me. That's a very different version of Cain than the one we know. And maybe, just maybe, Cain is not the bad guy in this story. And that this story is not just about fratricide, but it's about God's capacity for forgiveness. So now I have this one story, one of the classic stories of Cain, who brought murder into this world, the world's first villain, who may not be the bad guy in this story. And I also have the story of Superman, a character we all associate with strength, who maybe comes from a point of vulnerability. And that's where the novel really took off for me and where it came together. The themes just exploded, and I knew I was going to write about this book where Cain kills Abel, but the murder weapon from that murder is lost to this day. In 1932, a man named Mitchell Siegel is killed. And in grief, his young son creates a bulletproof man. When Superman was first created, it was just a bulletproof man. He didn't have heat vision, he didn't have x-ray vision, he couldn't even fly. All he was bulletproof because a little boy wanted a bulletproof dad. And that murder weapon is lost to this day. So the question was, what are these two murders thousands of years apart? One gives us the world's first villain in Cain. One gives us the world's greatest hero in Superman. What do they have to do with each other? And the answer was going to be in this book called The Book of Lies. Now, two things I should tell you about the book. One of them is that you'll see in the back of the book, we did for the first time, there's a soundtrack for the novel. Now, let's be clear about this. Does a novel need a soundtrack? No, it does not. Is it cool to have a soundtrack? Yes, it is cool to me. It is very cool to have a soundtrack. I love the ads that are run on the Metro, and that makes me happy. But a soundtrack, the reason I love it is you get to pick the music. You get to pick the music for your soundtrack. And I will tell you, as many of you may know, because I honed my years of mix-making skills on my mixtape experience here in D.C., where I made such incredible mixes, and I'm sure you all know these, called Belle Biv de Meltz, Please Melts Don't Hurt 'Em, Meltzy Fresh, and the famous Meltzy Soul. And with skills like this to make such mixed tapes, I was infinitely qualified for Sony Records to hear my song choices. And I went to Sony and I said, well, now I have to pick my favorite song. So I'd like to pick the theme from the TV show The Greatest American Hero. And so I said to them, okay. They said, you can't have the song. And I said, why not? They said, well, because Warner Brothers owns the song and we're Sony Music and we hate them and you're not getting the rights. And I remembered that Stephen J. Cannell, who created The Greatest American Hero and the A-Team, and let's be honest, my childhood, is also a fellow novelist. And I knew someone who knew him, and so I called him up and I said, listen, we want to get the rights, and Warner Brothers owns the rights. And he said, oh, no. Warner Brothers doesn't own the rights. I said, who does? And he says, I do. And I said to him, can I have it? And he was nice enough to say yes. So we got The Greatest American Hero theme, and that's cool to me. We also got a little band called REM, and that's cool to me. And we got a song called The Book of Lies. There was a guy who read the book and wrote a real song called The Book of Lies. I don't care if it's the worst song on the entire planet. That's the greatest song of all time to me, right? I go to bed every night listening to it now. I'm like, oh, sing to me my own novel. Oh, please. Sing to me your sweet song. And I love it. It's fantastic. But what I really love, and this is what I am proud of about the soundtrack, is we did for the first time something different. We actually had Sony Music do a score for the book, where we picked instrumental music that you can read along with the book. And you can download it on Amazon or on iTunes. And you can actually, it picked out certain chapters of the book, and you can read chapter 1 or chapter 7 and listen to the instrumental music that goes with it, just like a movie would. And what I love about that is it's as close as I can get to relaying for you the emotions that I'm trying to convey through words. And music is manipulative, and this is as manipulative as we get in a good way. I really think it's just an incredible different reading experience. And if you only buy one of the songs, there's free ones on the website. You don't have to pay for any of them. Don't tell Sony I told you that. Take the last song. The last song goes with the last chapter of the book, and you can read that, what I was writing to my mother, and you can read that and listen to that music, and it is about as pitch perfect as we can get it. The other thing I want to tell you about when it comes to this book is the house where Superman was created, the Siegel House in Cleveland, Ohio. And some of you may have heard this, but I'll tell you, when I was researching the novel, I went back. I wanted to see where Superman was created. Where's the spot where a 17-year-old kid sat up in bed one night and said, I have an idea? And so I went to Cleveland, and I figured it would look like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, that it would, have steaming apple pie waiting on the front porch for me. And the house where Google was founded is protected. But the house where Superman was created is a mess. And I don't mean it just needs some paint. I mean there are holes in the walls, there are holes in the ceilings. It's a wreck. And the family that lives there, they still live there to this day. The wife said to me, do you know Cleveland, Ohio won't even give us a plaque, not even a plaque to say that Superman was created here. And I said to her, I'm going to get you your plaque. And I said to her, I'm going to be back. And I didn't know what I meant. That was just a macho thing to say at the moment, right? I'm like, I'll be back. And I put the finger up like this so she knew I really meant it. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had the finger, so I had to go with it. And I said to her, I'm going to be back. And I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what to do. So I did the only thing that I ever know how to do. And that is to tell the story. That's all I ever know how to do, is to tell the story. And I started telling the story to people in television, to people in entertainment, to everyone that would listen, comic book writers, comic book artists, anyone who would hear. And everyone said the same thing to me. Brad, tell me what you need. Just tell me what you need. And so I went and started asking them for stuff. Now, let me also be clear about this. I believe ordinary people change the world. I don't care where you went to school. I don't care how much money you make. No, thank you, but I don't care how much money you make. That is nonsense to me. I believe in regular people, and that is how movements get started. And I believe in people like Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who was so poor that these two kids used to draw on the back of wallpaper, and they gave us Superman. So we went out, and to test this thesis, we started a website called OrdinaryPeopleChangeTheWorld.com, and we got the greatest artists who ever drew Superman to draw pictures for us, draw original drawings of that character, of the X-Men, of Spider-Man, the Hulk, and of course of Superman. We got David Letterman and Stephen Colbert to donate stuff because they were fans of Superman. We got the TV show Heroes, which if you want to walk on part and be on the TV show Heroes and you're the high bidder, and the auction ends this Tuesday, you can be on the show. And I donated a character name in my next novel. So for all the people in this audience who I've put in this book for free, no longer, folks. It is going to cost you now. And so the next character will be someone who wins the auction there. And our goal was that we're going to fix it, just the outside of the house, just to make sure the roof is closed, make sure we fix the rotted paint. Our goal was to raise $50,000. We have 4 weeks of the auction. We're done with week 3. This is the final week of the auction. We are now at the $74,000 mark. And it's proof of that. And again, I thank you, but it's not me. It's all the amazing people out there. It's all the ordinary people who care about this. And I love when someone pays a little bit of money for a great Superman drawing. There's a great picture of Lois and Superman that I know is going to make some great wedding present for someone, and that's great. But what I love is I love the people who came to this site and donated $10 and $20 over and over and over again. That is proof that the thesis is true. And that is what we're trying to accomplish. So I don't know if we're going to succeed. Now we're going to try and go after the inside, but we're going to try. And that's what, to me, is important. So with that said, I'd love to ask, you can ask questions. You can ask about anything about comics, novels, television. I write fiction. I'll make up an answer. And let's see where we get from there. Yeah, and if you can step to the microphone, that's great. Yes, sir.
I'm kind of curious. 4 or 5 times you used we. We hit the bestseller list as close as we could get to Pitch Perfect. Who's the we?
Yeah, no, I'm not one of those crazy people who talks in the third person about himself. My wife, Corey, who's sitting right here. This is, no, there's one name on the cover of every book, but only a fool thinks it's a one-person show. And in my family, she is my first editor, my first reader. I bounce every idea off of her. And it is, of course, a we. And, it's how it has always been. I can't change that. But there's the simple answer is my wife, who always sits in the front row, even though she's heard this about 30 times. She's like, "You're still so good, Brad." And I'm like, actually what she says is, "Do I got to hear this crap again?" Other questions? Yes, sir. Can I sing a few bars of the Book of Lies, John asks. You want to see me clear this tent out really fast? You don't want to hear me sing? I could hum it for you, though. No, that wasn't the for applause. Trust me, you really don't want to hear me sing. Yes, sir. If you're a slow reader, how do you keep up with the music? Great question. We actually have a special version called the slow reader version, where the music's just extended out forever. Actually, the best part of classical music is it's so long. So you're going to go, "Man, I'm done. What's next?" Yes, sir. Yeah, the question is, do I visualize scenes while listening to music? I never listen to anything while I write. While I'm writing, the only thing I need is silence. It can be in any room. It could be anywhere. I've written books in apartments that are here on L Street. I've written apartments in Bethesda. I've written apartments when we moved out of Maryland. All over the place, I can write in any location. That's always been easy. The thing I can't do is have any sound. But I will every novel. There'll be albums that just constantly play in my head that just stick with me, and I can't tell you why. I know when I got my first novel, the one that I actually wrote, everyone says, "Oh, 10th Justice was his first book and it was such a hit." Actually, it was the second book. My first book is a novel that's unpublished to this day, or I should say published by Kinko's to this day. And it still sits on my shelf. It got 24 rejection letters. To be clear, there were only 20 publishers. I got 24 rejection letters. That means some people are writing you twice to make sure you get the point. And the Rolling Stones, "You Can't Always Get What You Want," was playing over and over. Every station that I would go to had that. Elliot in the Morning was like playing it over and over. And I was like, and that song was forever, when I started the 10th Justice, was the song that always kind of inspired me to go forward. But otherwise, the music is always a background. Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for sharing your imagination and your creativity with all of us. What is the biggest challenge that you face as a writer, and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, the question, as you heard, is what's the biggest challenge? And I think the hardest part of writing is eventually putting it out there. That is the scariest part. And because you can write it and do it yourself, and that's okay. But, listen, I got 24 rejection letters. I had 24 people tell me, "Don't do this. You can't do it. This is awful. Forget it, Brad." I'm quoting here. And I don't look back on it and say, well, I was right and they were wrong and ha-ha on them. Life is subjective. So when anyone asks me that question, the one thing I always will say, and it's an approach to life, I don't care, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, you work as a general counsel, I don't care what you do, don't let anyone tell you no. Okay, that is it. That is a rule for life. Don't let anyone tell you no. That is just one person's opinion. Someone said you just got to find one person to say yes. So the scariest part is always putting it out there. But I think, that's the only way I know how to do it is just to be stubborn enough and ram my head against the wall enough until you find that person who says yes. And then, again, the other part is just finding the right idea. And that is just, it's the Supreme Court definition of pornography. You just know it when you see it. But if anyone here, I will tell you, this is the last stop on my book tour after 20 cities. This is the last stop. I go on a plane and go home tonight. And nobody has stood up at a book signing and given me the next idea for my book. So now I'm a little pissed. Other questions? Yes?
How much nonfiction is there in the Book of Lies? I'm about a third of the way in, and I'm frustrated. I'm trying to figure out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, no, the question is what's real in the Book of Lies? And it is frustrating because so much of it is real, and you go, this has to be real, this can't be real, or this can't be real, it's real. The story of Jerry Siegel that you see in there is real. You'll see, and to your relief, at the end of the book, there is an author's note that actually tells you what's real and what's not. So I don't want to ruin that part for you. But you will see when you get to the end, it'll tell you exactly what parts are real. The scariest and saddest part is the best parts are true. And what I'm so proud of, this is a very personal book to me. It's a book it took me 11 years to be brave enough to put out there. And I don't look back on it and say I could have never written this book 11 years ago because I'm such a better writer now and I'm so fantastic now. And yes, Brad, you've done it again. That's obviously ridiculous. I don't think that for a moment. What I do believe is that I am more intellectually honest about what I write. And 11 years ago, I wouldn't have been honest about writing about my father or my mother. In fact, when my first novel came out, your reviews come out and that's it. The second novel comes out, the reviews come out. The third novel, someone wrote to me through the website and said, Brad, I've read 3 of your books now. What are your issues with your father? And you realize you're putting things in this book you don't even realize. So every time I go through what I think the best parts are the real parts you give of yourself and the real parts you take from the world. And anyone who's read any of the books, set in D.C. or anywhere else knows the best parts are the real ones. You want to know where the tunnels are below the White House? Read the First Council. You'll see it. And everyone who works there, I still get letters from people who work in the White House, and they say, it's my first week on the job, I'm reading your book, and I'm using it as my map to go around the White House. And I'm like, should I be happy about that? Or is that like a danger to national security? But I love the reality. So the real parts are revealed in the end. And the Jerry Siegel story is just one of the great stories of our time. I mean, not to compare biblical characters and comic book characters, but these are the great stories of our time. Cain and Abel and Superman, these stories persist for a reason. And they persist not just because they're interesting, they persist because they say something about us. Superman says something about us. Cain and Abel says something about us. And that is why we keep telling them generation after generation. But the story of his creation is, to me, one of the most amazing stories ever told. Other questions? Yes? Yeah, the question is, how do you approach novels versus comic books? And I'll even add TV into that as just a different medium. And for those who don't know, I write comic books as well as writing novels, and each one is a kind of different palette that you paint with. But to me, I treat them completely the same, and that is one way: character, character, character. That's all they're about to me. In novels, I just have words to play with, but I just build it on that. In one, you have pictures in comics. And in one, in television, you just have a lot of people telling you what to do. And I should actually use this moment to tell you the next couple projects in those different mediums. I'm working on the next novel right now. The next comic book I'm doing is called Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Joss Whedon. So that's actually a lot of fun. And then on television, we did a TV show called Jack and Bobby. And I could tell from that person nodding, that's our only viewer who ever watched Jack and Bobby right there. And I know I can, and usually when you say Jack and Bobby, it's supposed to be this big round of applause. We loved it, but I don't want your pity applause now. I don't want your pity claps now. No, you save it, because I'm going to tell you, Washington, D.C., why Jack and Bobby got canceled. It's all of your fault. All of you. I hold you all personally responsible for not watching us, and that's why they kicked us off the air in 10 minutes. And the thing about Jack and Bobby, it has a very simple premise. And the premise was there were these two brothers. One of them will be the president of the United States, and that's going to be fantastic. Right now, he is just a kid. The new show is called The Romeos. And The Romeos I'm working on with a guy named Marco Panette from Ugly Betty and a guy named Jeff Marks, one of the creators of Avenue Q. And the new show, the pitch is the Romeos are going to be the greatest band in the entire world, and that's going to be fantastic for them. But right now, they're just kids. So all we did was steal the idea for Jack and Bobby from ourselves and sell it back to the network. And the best part is they don't even know. Okay, they have no idea, because every time you go in and pitch a TV show, there's new people that you're talking to, because every year, everybody at the network gets fired. All the executives gets fired. It's like a Christmas present. It comes every year. Everybody's fired. All the shows are bad, so they fire everybody. And then you go into the room, and you got to tell your story to a new person. And I'm in the room. This is a true story. I have to tell it. I'm in the room. We're pitching Jack and Bobby, and the studio executive looks at me, and he says, "You know what I love about this idea of the Romeos? I don't know if you remember it, but it reminds me of this show called Jack and Bobby." And I look at him, I'm like, that was a really good show. And the best part is he has no idea. My agent's in the room. I'm like, you're fired. You didn't even tell him I'm one of the creators of the show. And I said, we're supposed to be working on the script right now. And I told the guys, I'm like, don't bother writing it. Just hand in the script we wrote for Jack and Bobby. They're never going to know. Just change the title. So we're working on Jack and Bobby the musical right now. And they clearly have no idea about it. So with that said, let me say the most important thing since we're out of time, and that is to say thank you. This is the, as I said, last stop on my entire tour. I've been traveling since September 2nd till now. I don't know what my family looks like anymore. They don't know me anymore, but this is the best place to stop. This is home. And this is the town that gave me my very first start ever. And you realize after 11 years that there are people pulling for you from all over the place, but there is no place where they pull for us like Washington, D.C. And I thank you over and over and over again for doing that. I really appreciate it, and thanks for your time.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.